open this. Why don't we open this meeting? It's a single topic meeting. This is an informational meeting only. We have a presentation of a draft copy of the Pocd that we'd like to present. If people in the audience would have a question, if you just kindly raise your hand and we'll let you in. But I'm going to turn this over now to Matt, who is the chairman of the Pocd committee. Let him make the introductions, and we'll carry on.
Okay. Thanks, Wes. So just a quick introduction. The full Planning and Zoning Commission back in early 21 began to discuss the rewrite of the Plan of Conservation and Development. We had several meetings where we talked about the 2013 version and what we thought we should add, what we thought we should change. But after several meetings, the full commission decided that we, rather than rewrite it on our own, that we hire a consultant to help us. We spent the next several months interviewing consultants. We got 3 proposals and ultimately settled on Planometrics and Glenn Chalder. And in the late spring of 21, we began to meet with Glenn as a Plan of Conservation and Development subcommittee. So there's been 4 of us on the subcommittee. Donna has been attending all the meetings and helping us guide through, and Glenn Chalder, who is going to make a presentation as soon as I'm done talking, helped us get to this point. So we reviewed the we reviewed the 2013 plan. Glenn prepared several booklets that we reviewed as a subcommittee in meetings that were open to the public, that were all recorded. And I hope that the majority of our fellow townspeople had a chance to review our progress and our deliberations. And now I'm going to turn it over to Glenn, if I may. And Glenn, welcome and thank you for your help so far. And Glenn's going to walk us through a presentation of where we are today with our first draft of the Plan of Conservation rewrite that we'll call the 2022 plan.
Great. Thank you very much, Matt. I think I've put together a PowerPoint, which I think is going to give an overview of the myriad of topics which are in the Pocd, give a high-level overview of the recommendations in the plan, and really kind of set the stage here for discussion tonight. So thank you, everybody, for attending, and I'll give a brief overview of the plan. The main things I want to touch on here tonight is what is a Plan of Conservation and Development, give an overview of Kent's 22 draft plan, get comments, feedback, and input so that we can all work together to make it a better plan. And then at the very end, describe what we think the next steps are going to be for the Pocd. So the first thing really to touch on is what is a Pocd. It's a document which has got a long history in planning. It's part of the original Planning Enabling Act back in the 1920s. But the basic concept is the creation of an advisory document to help guide a community into the future. Its overall purpose is for strategies to help the community become a better place in the future, to identify issues to be addressed. It doesn't dictate who has to do what, but our job, we feel, is to get consensus, and that's why we appreciate everybody's input here tonight, to put good ideas on the table so they can become part of the Plan of Conservation and Development. So as many people are aware, there's different types of plans. There are strategic plans, which are very big picture, long range views for companies, for communities. And then there can also be other types of documents, tactical plans, which are much more focused in now on either a shorter time frame or particular topical areas. There can also be operational plans, which can be very immediate and intense. And there can also be contingency plans. And I think the different types of plans make some sense if you think about the different types of organizations that get involved in them. depending on how you have your screen set up, there's actually over here in the far right margin, kind of an overview. The strategic plans are done by groups like boards of directors or upper echelon of companies, et cetera, to identify broad goals and objectives. And often this is also used by government agencies such as the Planning and Zoning Commission. Tactical plans are often done by agencies or departments in terms of particular specific issues that they're addressing or outcomes. And then operational plans can actually be much more focused and also much more directive in terms of what the strategies are. So I think it's important for us to keep in mind that we're at the strategic plan level at this point in time. And then over the next 10 years, the goal, intent, and hope is that different entities involved in implementation will move forward with tactical plans and operational plans to make things happen. And generally speaking, people want more specificity in a plan. If it's a hierarchical type of structure where people give commands, if you will, to other people, or people are receiving commands from other people. And so when people want or need to tell other people what to do, often the plan can get quite specific, but it can also mean that people are excited about getting started on implementation. I think oftentimes people ask or seek more flexibility in a plan when they're in a consensus setting, when they want agreement on what should be done as a setting the stage for future types of activities, but they also want to remain flexible in terms of adapting to change and things that will happen in the future. It's kind of remarkable when we think back on the changes in Kent in the last 10 years. The next 10 years are probably going to be similar. So having a flexible kind of approach is something that this plan anticipates. I think it's also important to remember that the real measure of the success of a plan, it's not its creation, but its implementation. And our goal here is to get consensus and then move towards implementation. And so that's our sense of what a plan of conservation and development is about. And I think in that vein, the plan has been set up. The different chapters of the plan have tables that look like this, that identify policies and action steps that are recommended for Kent as part of the future. And then also the column on the right are leaders and partners who would be involved in implementation of the policies and strategies. And so it's hoped that this type of approach with clear directions and clear responsibilities will help in implementation. Now, in terms of the plan itself, it's broken up into 6 major sections. The introduction at the beginning kind of sets the stage for what is a plan of conservation and development and talks about some of the work efforts that were undertaken and sets the stage for the plan. And then at the end, there's a conclusion. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But the main body of the plan are 4 themes related to Kent and what we anticipate will be important over the next 10 years. The first theme is the concept of sustainability and resiliency. The next theme we've called community assets. The next theme is the concept of development-related activities that may occur in Kent over the next 10 years. And then also what we've called infrastructure elements here. And I'll talk about each of these and give an overview of it. Introduction summarizes prior planning efforts in town, the process that has been used here and how the plan is organized. There's some basic information on the history and some of the statistical information related to Kent. Unfortunately, the census data has been delayed for another year. It isn't expected to come out till May of next year, but we've taken the best available data to understand what's going on. And then we also did some analysis on community issues and concerns. I think overall, in terms of conditions and trends, the key thing that we learned was the changing age composition of Kent overall, the increasing median age. I think over the last 50 years, the median age in Kent has increased by about 20 years in terms of the median age of the population. Median age means half the people are older and half the people are younger. And the chart, which is actually over here on the right, puts this median age into a graph, which shows the steep increase, if you will, in median age over time. And this is important for the plan because many of our programs and activities in the community are focused on residents and their needs. So understanding that an aging population can have different needs is an important foundational element for the plan itself. We also undertook a community survey. We had 432 participants, about 15% of Kent's reported population. And we asked people a couple of things which were instrumental and helpful in the plan. The first of which is we asked people for things in Kent that they were particularly proud of. The things that people identified were feeling of community, the physical character of the community in the town center. Those are things that resonated strongly with people. We asked them about things in Kent that perhaps they were sorry about. People identified businesses and sort of some of the challenges in the pandemic with some vacancies that occurred. Recreational services, people wanted more, expressed a desire for more. And then also the town center in terms of addressing issues such as the sidewalk debate discussion and businesses, et cetera, in the town center. We also asked people a question related to activities that the town could take or be involved in. We asked them how important they felt these issues and topics were, and how good a job the town was doing in these particular areas. And we ended up with a cross-tabulation graph of importance versus performance, and identified which ones people felt were important, the town was doing a good job on. At the other end of the spectrum, things of lower importance that the town wasn't doing a very good job on, but also focused in on these two middle categories here on things that we felt the town could do some more work on in the future. And this actually identifies the issues of sustainability, resiliency, climate change, carbon footprint, which ended up being the first key element, if you will, in the POCD overall. So the sustainability thing is not a topic that had a lot of coverage in the current plan. But in this plan, we've tried to identify some of the various elements of sustainability. And these include things like climate sustainability and climate change, greenhouse gases, fossil fuels, things like that, which is growing recognition of. It also touches on ecological sustainability, air, water, quality issues, energy, social sustainability in terms of the age composition of the community, and then economic sustainability in terms of employment, goods and services, et cetera. The town is participating in the Sustainable CT program, which suggests ways that communities can work at being more sustainable and get recognition for that. And the plan encourages those efforts. There's also a section tied in here in terms of sustainability, which is also the concept of resiliency, which is really the ability of the community to adapt to changing circumstances. If there is climate change, if weather events are either going to become more significant, more severe, more frequent, how can the community prepare itself for these types of things, minimize exposure, mitigate potential impacts, and similar types of things. So oftentimes it's considered as part of a municipality's efforts, but I think it's also important to call it out because there are things like ARPA funds and other things like that that can fall into this category, and where Kent could get resources to help adapt to these types of things. The next thematic element of the plan is, again, called community assets. The medal in the far right side, where number one is meant to reflect the fact that almost across the board in the survey, people who participated identified these issues as being important to them, and they felt the town was doing a good job for most of these efforts. And those include things like protecting natural resources, preserving open space, protecting cultural assets, promoting agriculture, enhancing community character. And these are areas where the plan recommends that we can stay the course and continue the type of work effort and the cooperation and the partnerships that go on in Kent already in these particular areas. Generally speaking, these sections of the plan have individual components to them. The concepts are things like protecting natural resources, preserving open space, promote farms and farming, preserve cultural resources, maintain community character. And pretty much in the plan, each of these elements has a map that identifies the locations in town where these resources are. And this is meant to help the community and the commission as activities occur or people are investigating or analyzing something. The POCD could be a go-to place to get some basic information that people can start to work with. This is a bit of a change from the current plan. The maps in the current plan were in the appendix, and so they weren't as readily available. And these maps are right there with the text. So you can read something on one page and see the map on the facing page. And the idea here is to try to be user-friendly in terms of the information. Next major theme of the plan is about how to guide development in the future. There's 3 components here. The first of which is maintaining, enhancing Kent's Village Center. Another one is guiding business and economic development. And then the third is the issue of guiding residential development. I think overall, Kent's Village Center has been a key part of the community, key part of all the plans over the years. It's recognized and appreciated as a place that really resonates with people. And I think maintaining and enhancing that ends up being a key element of the plan because of the importance that people place on it. The plan contains recommendations and also contains some principles and concepts. And these could be evaluation concepts for applications or things that may be proposed at some point in time in the future. So they're not always specific recommendations about who might be doing what, but also to guide overall long-term planning effort. On the map, which is here in the background, the streetscape project is identified as being a priority. Work on that will continue. And then also interest in charging stations in the town center as an important element to support the town center and visitors and tourists, etc. Another part of this section is about guiding business and economic development. The plan recommends these efforts continue, that the town look at ways to support economic development efforts, not necessarily through an economic development commission, although that could be a possibility, but to support the efforts of the Chamber of Commerce and the Northwest Hills COG and various initiatives which they've advanced to try to promote economic development in the community, to enhance the community overall. And clearly, we've also continued the strategy that Kent has had for many years about avoiding strip development outside of the town center area, but really the town center area would be the focus. There are 2 areas outside of the town center, or I guess the industrial zone on Maple Street is at the edge of the town center, but the plan does recommend that we look at these areas to make sure that zoning is doing what we want it to do, that the boundaries are correct, so that it will continue to serve us well into the future. There's a section in the plan about residential development. As I'm sure you're aware, most of the land in Kent is zoned for residential use. The residential zoning, which is soil-based, has served the community well for a number of years. It helps guide development in ways which are compatible with soil types, terrain, and infrastructure availability. But the plan goes on from that to build on the work that's been done by in part of the preparation of the housing plan for Kent. And those strategies are summarized in the POCD. We recognize that that document is on a parallel pathway headed to kind of a similar time frame to what we're working with. But our goal is to continue to coordinate with that effort so that the policies and strategies will carry through from both documents together to address the need for housing, affordable housing in particular, to help meet the needs of current and future residents. So again, that's a change from the prior plan. The last major thematic element is about infrastructure. That includes community facilities and services, roadway circulation, pedestrian, bike, transit, and utility infrastructure overall. We took a scan of all the community services and facilities. We felt that a number of facilities are expected to be adequate for community needs for the next 10 to 15 years or so. Some issues might need to be considered at some time in the future related to town hall, fire department, emergency medical, wastewater treatment, some other things. We struggled a little bit with the parks recreation element. We know that a master plan has been worked on there for a number of years. The survey results, residents felt that more could be done. And so we struggled a little bit between red or maroon color, not expected to be adequate for community needs for the next 10 to 15 years, or there are some issues to be considered. And so if anybody has any input on that, we'd certainly love to hear that as to what would be the appropriate way to address some of those issues or concerns. And the Kent Memorial Library is working on expansion. And so any issues there will likely be addressed in the near future. Roadway circulation, the plan recommends that we continue to look at and address safety issues. There aren't a lot of areas with high traffic incidents or locations. There are a couple. The plan recommends that we look at ways to try to address those in the future. But overall, our goal should also be to maintain the character of the roadways. We're not interested in widening roadways out so that they're no longer compatible with the character of Kent overall, but to find ways to provide safe and efficient roadways to meet community needs. And also the plan recommends managing surfaces on town roads. There are differences between paved roads and unpaved roads, and road maintenance is expensive. So how can we address this efficiently and economically in the future? Plan recommends pedestrian, bicycle, and transit improvements. We recognize that sidewalks are pedestrian improvements. Well, sidewalks first, I guess. Really, the town center area is the core area where we would like to support pedestrian improvements. And again, the streetscape plan is a large part of those efforts. Kent and the Conservation Commission, the Land Trust, and others have done quite a bit in terms of trails in the community. We're fortunate to have the Appalachian Trail in Kent overall, but to continue to work on those pedestrian networks and also see if there are opportunities to enhance bicycle suitability. The map in the middle of the screen identifies from the state's DOT bicycle suitability map areas which are least or most suitable for biking. And this could be an area which could help support some of the other objectives in the plan. We do mention transit and rail. The commission, as part of the update of the zoning regulations, adopt a zone in anticipation, if you will, of rail service at some time in the future. And the plan supports that effort. Infrastructure, public water and sewer is a component of the plan. The vast majority of Kent is what is known as a planned sewer avoidance area. We don't anticipate that public water or public sewer would be extended into these outlying areas. And we have adequate water and sewer capacity to address the issues in the service area in and around Kent Center. The plan contains other recommendations about improving storm drainage treatments to preserve and protect water quality and incorporate what's known as low impact development into our future planning and regulatory and public works efforts. And because of responses in the telephone survey, the plan identifies broadband capacity and cellular services as key recommendations going forward as well. We did get a map showing the areas of cellular coverage from all providers. So this is kind of a mashup map of all of that. The green areas were areas that had service previously. The recent tower that was built up towards East Kent on the top of the hill provided the gray areas of coverage. And as you can see, there's still some blank spots or areas that people may look to be siting towers in the future. And so the plan incorporates siting principles and a possible telecommunications policy to help guide those efforts and communicate effectively with the siting council. And so now we're into the conclusion of the plan. There's an evaluation of consistency with the state and the regional plan, and our recommendations and their recommendations are compatible in terms of their directions and mapping, et cetera. And as I mentioned earlier, implementation is a key focus of this plan, and identifying who's responsible for doing what. And plans suggest a plan implementation committee, which could help identify priorities and when things could happen. And following adoption of the plan, it's anticipated an Excel table will be created, which now provides a tool which can be sorted and modified and amended over time to help address those kinds of things. So we're looking forward to community input tonight. That's the whole purpose for the meeting. I think oftentimes as part of the review of a plan, that the strength of the verb can be a key element in how people feel about a recommendation. And so if you think that you'd like the plan to be more assertive and directive, then you might recommend changing ideas to must, shall, and will. And if you're interested in being more suggestive or contemplative, you might favor verbs such as consider, encourage, or evaluate. And again, that's the type of feedback we think could be very helpful. So with that, I'll turn it back to Matt, and we look forward to your comments. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Glenn. So I think I'll start by saying thank you to all of the groups and individuals who have sent us comments to the draft POCD before tonight. I know that the Kent Affordable Housing and the Kent Conservation Commission both sent us comments as we got started a year and a half ago, and both of them have provided comments again now, and the Kent Sustainability Team and the folks at Lake Warramog from the 3 Lake Warramog organizations have sent comments to us as well. So to start off by saying thank you to them, and as Glenn said, tonight is really for us to listen to comments from the group. So if you want to raise your hand or just jump in, why don't we, if jumping in gets too unwieldy, then we'll ask you to raise your hands, but I'll open the floor. So we did a perfect job. Jos, I see, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, thank you for doing this. I do have a number of little things. I hope you don't mind if I start with a couple, and then hopefully somebody else will say something. First, say on page 18, where the lists what the survey says are the greatest challenges and the things that people would like to see happen. Now, this is very generalized. All the results of the survey are very generalized. Do you have any specific recommendations from this, like if make one thing happen, facility, service, and town center? What kind of things that people find important? Shouldn't that be mentioned? And then is that addressed in this report?
So, Josh, do you want to keep going, or do you want me to respond to that one?
Yeah, if you want to react to that.
I think all the responses on the survey were on an Excel spreadsheet, and so we summarized them here. But I certainly think for things like facility services, and maybe for the top 4 or 5, we could provide more detail. So that's a great observation, and we'll talk about that as part of the committee and move in that direction. So thank you for that.
Okay, then let's see, at page 24, the action steps for sustainability, and the 2, it says develop and implement strategies to become more sustainable, climate, ecological, energy, social, and economic. And then that's very general. So I would have liked to have seen some more specific suggestions there too. The only thing that is mentioned is the electric vehicle charging station, but can't we be a bit more specific with other things that could be done? I wouldn't directly be able to mention something, but I mean, it'd be great to get some more specifics there.
Thank you for that.
And there's some mapping things. So I saw that you're gonna allow us to see the maps better but when you provide links. But like the map on page 31, natural resources, it shows the 100-year floodplain and shows the wetlands. There are not many wetlands on there because a lot of the wetlands are covered up by the 100-year floodplain. Is it possible to, I mean, now it looks like there are not many wetlands, but so is there a way to show them both at the same time, or?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Jose, I know that you've taken a very careful look at the maps. Do you want to, if you could, put together an email to identify the maps and the issues? I think, or I can continue to write them down. How would you like to proceed?
Yeah, I could do that.
If you would, that would be great, because I think
Okay.
we want the maps to be accurate. We want them to be user-friendly for people and show important information. And our goal, again, is that these maps, you will have click links that you can get to a bigger map and really zero in on things. So if you've got thoughts or comments, we'd love to hear them. Thank you.
Then let's see, page 33, protect natural resources. The action items under number 4, you have consider adding under 3, modify the conservation development regulations to incorporate core forest areas and potential forest corridors as secondary conservation area. I think adding the core forest areas and forest corridors is important, but in the Conservation Commission, we talked about it and we listed it as one of our items. Maybe we should get rid of secondary versus primary conservation areas in the conservation development regulations, because what happens, steep slopes and wetlands are primary conservation areas. And when there's a subdivision, the developer will first pick those areas to set aside for open space, because they're primary conservation areas, and then all the other areas fall away. And there may be cases where other areas are more important. That's up to the Planning and Zoning Commission to decide, and they hopefully can also ask the Conservation Commission for input. But if we wouldn't separate them in primary conservation areas and leave it up to you what in each specific case is primary. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think the POCD subcommittee can talk about that and talk about that with the commission. It's quite possible on an undeveloped parcel, all of it could be considered core forest or a wildlife corridor. So I think that the concept was to provide some opportunity for development to happen, but to encourage it to happen in a thoughtful way. I think when the commission updated the zoning regulations, they essentially required the conservation development approach in all of the RU1 areas to promote a more organic and conservation related approach to development. So there wasn't any judgment that core forest or corridors weren't important, but it was to try to provide an opportunity for a thoughtful approach based on the characteristics of the parcel. So I think this is a good comment, Joost, and we'll talk it over.
Okay, I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in at this point, or otherwise.
Why don't we give someone else a chance. Yost, we're a little bit better than 3 minutes now, and we'll
Sure.
I know you've got other things to say, so we'll circle back. Teresa, I saw you had your hand up.
Good evening. I'm Teresa Duncan. I live in the Birch Hill, Bulls Bridge area. I was interested when I saw your agenda that you had Bulls Bridge area on the agenda, but I don't think that was spoken to this evening. Did I miss it, or was it just not brought up?
If I may, Matt, is that okay?
I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, I just asking Matt if it's okay if I responded to that. I think Bulls Bridge has an important role in the history of Kent. I mean, it's kind of remarkable when you think back about the importance of that area and the history and things that occurred there. In the current environment, Bulls Bridge is zoned business hamlet. And so as part of our discussion of the business zoning, we weren't quite sure whether the permitted uses and the boundaries of the district were really what we were looking for. So the plan recommends that the commission take a look at this in the future. I don't think it's going to have a dramatic impact on the area. The area has been zoned business hamlet for a number of years, and there's a number of different uses, but it's almost like going to see the doctor for a checkup. We just want to make sure that in that area, it reflects what we think is the most appropriate approach to that. So in the plan, if you get a chance to look at it online, I'm just peeking ahead here overall. I'll give you the page number. Apologize, taking me a second here. Page 69 of the plan. It's just one page that talks about Bulls Bridge. If you'd like to take a look at that, and if you have any thoughts or comments, email them to us. That would be wonderful.
I will do that, but I do have another comment, and that is years ago when the two developments, Saddle Ridge and Spooner Hill, were developed. Those of us who live down below, adjacent to the river, were promised that there was going to be a road access for us to leave the area when it flooded, and it has flooded several times. That has not happened yet, and it's been years since those two developments went in. There is a logging road up at the top of the hill, and years ago when I was in my 20s, I didn't have a problem climbing up that hill to be able to get out of the area that was flooded, because it floods on both sides of my house. So those of us who live in this area are cut off from fire, police, ambulance services. As I'm aging, ambulance services really stick in my mind. So I am concerned about this, and I am wondering when and if that road is ever going to be opened. It happened that when these developments were going in, that there was a lot of pushback from the people who were building the houses. They didn't want more traffic in their area. So it was in the end decided that the logging road would be open to us, accessible to us, but it would be tied or locked off during regular times, and it would only be open when Route 7 was not passable.
Reese, I made a note of your comment, but you've got history that I'm not privy to. So I'm going to have to do some additional research on that. So let me take care of that, and thanks for that comment.
And you can start with some of the people that have lived in this area for a long time and remember that promise.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Therese. David Carey.
Hey there. I haven't read the draft yet, so my comment, it may be addressed in there, but I thought you mentioned in your opening remarks that your kind of long-term plan for like looking at climate change and things like that went out 10 years. Was that correct?
Nah, let me restate it then. I think that the a plan of conservation and development is meant to look well into the future. So decades into the future in terms of the issues which are going to affect the community. But realistically, the action steps are focused on the next 10 years and what can or should be accomplished. So I guess it's a longer term view with a shorter term action approach is probably the best way to describe it.
Okay. And does it outline kind of certain ideas for, let's say, just aspirational thoughts going out till maybe like 50 years?
Yeah, I don't think it gets that specific. I mean, Kent's got a sustainability team that's been working on this for some time, and they're working on addressing the components of the Sustainable CT program. So the plan right now contains statements to promote their efforts and encourage them to adapt as opportunities arise and circumstances change, et cetera. I think there has been some input from some of the other correspondents mentioned by Matt, that they're advocating for some more specificity and specifics on that. And so that's definitely something we're going to be talking about. I guess we first wanted to make sure we were headed in the right direction. And now I guess the next question is how far should we be going? So that's where the input's very helpful.
Okay. And my last question is, where is the draft online? Can you just remind me of that? Is it on the town website or?
Yes, it is. Exactly the web address I don't have, but I think if you go to the town website, search for POCD or search in the planning
Okay.
commissions, it should be there prominently. If you have any issues, if you just contact Donna, she'll be able to email you a copy or tell you exactly where it is. So
Okay, great. Thank you.
thank you.
Yeah, David, it's as Glenn says, it should be prominent, but if you have trouble finding it, just go to the agenda for tonight's meeting, and it's included.
Great. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Sure thing. Okay, Lynn Worthington. Hi, Lynn.
Sorry, I've got bad light here. I had a question related to the comment about park and recreation and the recreational facilities. Did you guys talk with the commission or the because it seems like they're not really moving forward very quickly with the master plan. And I just wondered if you guys had conversation with them.
We did research and investigation early on with regard to these issues and the status of the master plan, and it had not moved along perhaps as quickly as it might have. But there have been staffing changes there, so we have a new director, and the evaluation of that plan, I understand, has picked up pace. So this POCD supports those efforts. Moving in that direction, but doesn't get into the nitty gritty of what they could or should do, but encourages them to prepare a thoughtful master plan to address community needs into the future. So I guess I'm hopeful for progress in the future, more so than we've seen in the past, but I don't think they're ready yet to unveil their work products.
I got one other quick question. You had briefly mentioned river access, and I apologize that I don't remember exactly what was recommended in the plan, but what is being recommended for river access? Because that's been a long-standing issue for our town, not having it.
Yeah, and the plan picks up on that and says, really, for a town that has as much river frontage as we do, can we do more for river access? So the plan advocates for that. We're cognizant of the work that was done by the Housatonic Valley Association with some management issues, I guess I'll call them, along the river corridor. And so we recognize it's a very sensitive issue in a lot of different ways, but the plan does advocate for more river access in the future. I think we were looking at the areas around, I think it was North Kent Road as being a possible area, but I think there's quite a bit of research and analysis that needs to go into this before the pick a specific plan and go.
Thanks.
Thank you, Lynn. So Justin Potter, and then we'll go to Joanne when Justin's through. Joanne West.
Hello. It was a great presentation, short but sweet, very, very helpful. So the housing plan is scheduled to be updated every 5 years, and the POCD has a 10-year time frame on it. So what is logistically, how are you going to sort of accommodate that in terms of, so right now you have the current draft housing plan reference. How are you going to sort of deal with the fact there's going to be another housing plan coming in 5 years?
Great question, Justin. I think what we're trying to get at this point in time is a connection between the two documents. But it's not, for example, that they're bolted together, but I think they're sort of loosely attached by ropes. Clearly, the housing strategies are going to follow a different path in terms of implementation and some of the efforts there. The POCD supports those efforts. If the plan changes in a material way in 5 years, the commission could update the POCD to reflect that document, or recognize the ongoing planning efforts. When a material change like that is made in a POCD, the town gets a new 10-year window, if you will, for the POCD. So it's hard to say what's going to happen in the future on this particular issue, but the POCD may now start to get 5-year updates. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with regard to that.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Justin. Okay, Joanne.
Hi, I'm on Route 7 with a window open. So anyway, I'm here as a representative of the sustainability team, and we're relatively new. We're very small. So anyone who'd like to join us, please do. And so our issue is that we really, for people who don't know about sustainable CT, we're trying to get certification. You get points in order to get certification with the state sustainable CT. And the certification really opens you up to different resources. We also, being part of the program, we do get the resources of sustainable CT, just people to work with on different issues and all. One of the big things is really incorporating what we do into the POCD, but so much of what we're doing is really new. I know in the letter that I sent you, I had said something about the creative placemaking plan. And even though we have not come up with that plan yet, to somehow put a marker in the POCD that we want to have a creative placemaking plan at some point. And I'm not going to go over everything I wrote in the letter. I assume you guys will read it. But I just wanted to find out from you, Glenn, have you done much work incorporating sustainability into these POCD plans before?
I mean, every town's different in terms of how they're approaching this issue. And so referencing the sustainable CT program is a sort of a direction the communities can use, as you've indicated Kent is doing, to start to address this issue and get access to resources. I think that some of the specific quotes you provided of how you or Kent can get points on the sustainable CT program was very helpful. I have done work on POCDs where we create sometimes a little sidebar with a sustainability logo in it. And then we put those throughout the plan to kind of help people understand that sustainability isn't just a chapter in the plan, it's thinking that ties into the other sections of the plan. So I think your communication was very helpful to us, and I'm going to try to come up with an approach to share with the subcommittee that will support the efforts that the sustainability team is working on, help get you guys points, but also maintain some flexibility as things may change in the future. So hopefully we're going to find a happy place to get all that done.
Okay. And one other thing is that there's just not a lot of reference to cultural resources. I know you have like historic, a list of historic places. You have in cultural resources, you have some of the private schools. I feel like part of this, the POCD should be the public school, you know, especially if we're trying to get younger families to move in. A public school is really important. Part of sustainability is doing a youth arts program, and it is doing like cultural, you know, just vibrancy and vitality is a really big part of what we're going to go after. And so I also, you know, if we could find a place to kind of fit that in as well.
So POCD has a funny role on this because the basic concept on a community facility is, does it have the capacity and the resources to meet future needs over the next 10 years? And oftentimes the Board of Ed can get a little sensitive about us playing in their sandbox. So we tend to look at the more critical physical infrastructure elements related to the school. Is it big enough? Does it need classrooms? Does it have the land area available to it? There is a recommendation in the POCD, as there has been before, that if we might find the opportunity to work with Kent School, we currently lease the fields next to the school, and it's an integral part of sort of the school experience. Could we perhaps find a way to integrate that? I think your comment about sort of the cultural activities which occur there could be a great way to put, again, a sidebar in the plan and the concept of social sustainability,
Yeah.
partly cultural, but those issues. So that's, again, where your correspondence is very helpful.
Okay, I think that's all I have. Oh, I guess my other thing was, we had given you a report from the Nature Conservancy where they did the resiliency with stakeholders, the Kent Community Resilience Building Summary of Findings. And I just wasn't sure if you had used that. I was just going to encourage you to look at it because.
Yeah, I'm going to take another look at it because of your
Okay.
correspondence. I think that the draft plan, we had a draft together, I think before that meeting was done, so it didn't get in initially. But I
Okay.
think now, again, with your input here tonight, we'll take another look at that and see how we can address, or at least reference it, so that people
Right.
are aware of that.
Right, yeah, just even a reference to it. I mean, there's so much overlap, I feel, in what you have and what they have, but just some kind of reference to it would be
Yep.
great. Okay, thank you.
Joanne, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Sanchez.
Thank you,
You're
Mr. Winter. So, Matt, Glenn, and the rest of the group, thank you so much. A very comprehensive report, and gave a really nice picture of our town. I've got three issues, things to talk about. On the development 4.1 on page 59 and 58, you talk about vehicular and pedestrian circulation in the village center with principles and concepts. I am also on the Main Street Noise and Traffic Subcommittee, which should be meeting now, but I told them that I would be on this.
You'd be a little bit late. Yeah, there you go.
I told them I got a POCD to talk about, but we already gave a report to the Board of Selectmen, mostly about signage, how we would like to talk to the Connecticut DOT and perhaps lower the speed limit on Main Street from 30 to 25, and maybe expanding that a little bit out north and south of Route 7 and east and west on 341. We would like to get the Connecticut DOT out here to check that out. That was one of our recommendations. Another concerned pedestrian traffic, actually. We talked about the timestamp at the monument, how maybe that could be lengthened. That was our first report, and hopefully that'll go somewhere with the Board of Selectmen. But I was wondering if those findings were relevant to your report, and if they were, could at least the summary be added in there, or maybe that report could be referenced in your report here.
Yeah, I think, Glenn, if you could send us just a quick email that would say, bum, bum, bum. Because I think the issues in the section on Kent Center, we do talk about the importance of the pedestrian experience and crosswalks and walk time, having gaps and everything else. We recognize the town started the process of the streetscape project, and that's going to be a big step forward. But we're going to have to sort of digest that and now see what the next steps are. And I appreciate your input on speed limits, perhaps, or even kind of revisiting crosswalks and things like that. So I think if you could give us just some top of mind type of thoughts for the plan, we can look for opportunities to include that. So that's very
Great.
helpful.
I'll do that. Thank you. And related to that subcommittee, and Lynn Worthington already answered my question. I had never really thought of a river walk in town, although that would be fantastic. And I was going to ask this group, on that map on page 60 and 61, is that the most realistic place for Riverwalk? Are there other ways to have more access near town? Clearly that's ongoing. But what I thought, actually, while looking at that, was this. As part of our noise and traffic subcommittee, we are now on the enforcement part, and talking with the resident trooper, who on a busy weekend in the summer, for example, would have to go to the falls up in the north of town, to Bulls Bridge in the south of town, and doesn't have as much time to spend in the middle of the village. And that's something that the Noise and Traffic Committee is looking at. How can we get more enforcement in town? And I was just thinking, okay, if there was some kind of river access, some of those more water-orientated folks might be more apt to come into town. So just something to throw out. I never really thought about a river walk before, but your report made me think of that, which is pretty interesting. And then my last point only is that I am also on another subcommittee, the Swift House Task Force. And I did notice that the Swift House came up a couple of times in your report on page 41 under community assets, other historic resources, and on page 78. So we're trying to figure out what to do ultimately with that house. That house has not been used as it has previously for the last couple of years. We've been talking about ADA approval and how much that would cost and all of that. So I just want to take note that the Swift House is in your report. And my question is, did that come about? And there's a picture actually of the Swift House in your report. Is that something did that come out of the survey? Did people ask about the Swift House? I mean, how did that get into your report, if you don't mind me asking?
No, I think it didn't show up strongly in the survey results, but I was aware of the study committee that had looked at, perhaps that's the committee you're on, Glenn, in terms of activities there for the progress that was being made in terms of donated work efforts and re-envisioning some of the spaces in the building as to how those could be used. To be honest with you, I felt based on everything I read, the progress was being made and it was in good hands. So realistically, in the analysis, that caused it to be receive a more favorable rating. Yes, there's work to be done, but there's a group in place working on it, and they appear to be doing a good job. So it gets it's more of a cheerleading, keep up the good work type of thing. I know it's not always easy, but again, the POCD's job is not to meddle in what is going on at the micro level. The real purpose here is to support these kinds of efforts that help keep the Swift House relevant to the community and its needs.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you.
I look forward to your email. So please, if you would, thank you.
I will email you about the noise and traffic report. So thank you.
Thanks, Glenn. So I don't see any hands up.
Matt, I've got a question.
Oh, go ahead, Wes.
Okay. For Glenn and perhaps the subcommittee on page 46. And in my reread, I caught this and I was wondering what the genesis of number 25 was. This is in the description of town character areas, dirt roads. There's 15 miles, so you say, of dirt roads. It's not identified on the map. It's a huge area, and not all dirt roads are character areas, I will assure you. I'm just wondering, to me, this is a problematic item.
So I think there were, with regard to this issue, if I may, page 46 and 47 does have a description of the town character areas. And this is a map, I think, prepared by the Conservation Commission some years ago as part of the Natural Resources of Kent approach and the mapping projects that had been done. And I always think it's important as part of a POCD to identify where character areas are so that if they're threatened in any way, shape, or form, we can say, hey, look, it's been in our town plan for X years that this is an area that we think is important. And as part of my research and investigation, I felt there were two areas to be considered for addition. And I think if the commission feels they're good ideas, we can include them. And if they don't, we don't have to include them. The first of these is Cobble Hill, which is the hill behind Town Hall. And it's really such a backdrop to the town center that if anything was to happen there, it would be terribly unfortunate. So I wanted to put it on the same level, if you will, of some of the other recommendations. And then dirt roads can be modified or changed over time. As identifying them as character areas, I thought there might be more support for making sure that we maintain the character of those areas, even if we're making drainage improvements or other types of situations. So I didn't want to open a Pandora's box, Wes, and so maybe 25 should either be mapped or shouldn't be on the list, or we can still talk about that.
To me, I only bring it up because I think we should discuss that further.
Maybe it's not ready for the POCD at this time, right? Because depending on our adoption timeframe and schedule, et cetera, we just may want to identify that as a sidebar on this page and say, hey, dirt roads are part of our character and we should look at them more closely, but not actually put them on the map as having more significance.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Many of the dirt roads are actually part of other town character areas already. So most of them are in there already.
And we know, Yost, that I'm sorry, Glenn, that the Conservation Commission had some comments about adding town character areas that were not part of that initial mapping, and they were worried that it was going to I think they said dilute the gravitas, as it were, of the initial report. But I think, as Wes says, it's worth discussing. Glenn, you bring up some good points about why it could be good to at least mention them now in the POCD. As we said, it's a 10-year plan, and without. But I also agree with what Wes said, with what Yost said. So, hey Yost, before we get back to you, Miss Speck has her hand up, so I'll call on her, and then we'll get to you, since she hasn't spoken yet.
Thanks, Matt. And thanks to your subcommittee and planning and zoning and Glenn. It's really an incredible body of work that you're pulling together, and it's an amazing feat that you're all taking on. Just a couple of really more considerations that I hear a lot sort of going up to the state level about climate change initiatives. And I wonder if it's worth considering including things like, there's a thing called the TCIP, which is the Transportation and Climate Initiative Program. So that's the reducing greenhouse emissions. There is also a whole initiative that's being conducted at the state level to achieve a 45% greenhouse gas reduction by 2030. And so these are big long-term initiatives that I think trickle down and are worth a mention and a hyperlink in the that climate section, because we, obviously we're all in this together from a, town perspective, and then we want to, participate and take part in the initiatives that are happening at that state level, where they're trying to reduce greenhouse gases, trying to, take cars off the road, all those climate change initiatives. So I would, and I can send you an email on this, Glenn, just a couple of references to those different climate change initiatives that are happening at the state level would be great.
Jean, that would be great. Thank you.
Awesome. And then the other one is the sustainable materials management, and I can send you a link and a little bit of information on that. DEEP has a long-term plan with the Mira plant closing and the whole municipal solid waste sort of mess that's happening up north due to that plant closure this year. DEEP has come out with a coalition that's really looking to manage materials in a better way. And there's some long-term goals that I think would be appropriate to include in the sustainability climate change section. And then I have a sort of larger conceptual question about the maps. Would it be something that you all could consider using, whether it's an ArcGIS or whatever sort of interactive map platform, to, instead of creating all these separate sort of static maps, to have a master map that is live and people can use click on and click off layers. So they're really looking at one map. And when they go to, different sections, they can have that map that's a more of an interactive map. And I think it would also really create some interconnectiveness to the whole, in a holistic way, to the POCD, rather than looking at lots of separate maps, creating one, and it can also be done in Adobe, but creating one map that has all the different layers instead of all separate. Just something to consider as we're technology is moving fast, and we certainly want to try to keep up with it. So just a couple of considerations, and thanks.
Thank you, Jean. I think on the map platform idea, I think Kent's sort of an interesting situation. You're fortunate to have HVA that provides a lot of mapping support for the community. So they're able to produce maps and host maps. So that might be an opportunity. We've committed, when we borrowed their data to create and support the maps for the POCD, we pledged to them that they would get all of our data back. So our budget wouldn't allow the establishment of a map platform, but if you could work with HVA, all this data is going to come back. And I think that is something that could be accomplished working with them. So
yeah, that would be a great partnership.
Yep, it would.
Great. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Sure, Jean. Okay, Yos. You just come off mute, please.
Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, Yos.
No, okay. In the character resources action list on page 52, the first two items, like seek to maintain and enhance the overall character of the community while accomplishing other community objectives. And that last part is in bold face and underlined in both of those cases. Now, doesn't that kind of undercut what you're saying before that, or doesn't that make it less important if you then make this in bold and underlined?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that's a good point, Yos. Well, we'll talk about that with the subcommittee. I think the idea is that there are certain community objectives we would like to address. So, for example, in the prior conversation with Glenn, for example, we discussed the concept of a river walk. Well, a river walk's going to be near the river. There's probably going to be some floodplain, hopefully not any wetland impacts, but we're going to have to try to balance those things. So our intention would not be to negatively affect things, but we'd like to accomplish some of the other community objectives. But I think the bolding of the text, as I look back on it now, seems a little over the top. So I think that's a great observation. I've made a note of it, and we'll talk about it with the committee.
Thank you. And I didn't see any notes about planting street trees and maintaining them and replacing them. And I think an action item should be to create a tree budget line. I don't think we have a budget line in the town budget for street trees. We have all kinds of ash trees dying, and the streetscape work will maybe harm some of the trees too. So I'd like to see that as a point of action to to get a budget line approved for that.
Got it?
Then I have a question about the Berkshire Transformer property, which is in the industrial zone. That's still a brownfield site, isn't it? And if so, isn't it about time that we, or at least say that we want to do something about that, get it cleaned up and get something of more importance there than what is there now? It seems underused. And if there would ever be a railroad or a passenger railroad, then that would be a good site for a station and parking area. That's one option. Then the field near the town hall, so that's a incentive housing zone. But it's not mentioned, I believe, that we would really want mixed mixed income housing with an affordable housing component. I think that should be a priority. It was on the market and it was listed for high income housing, basically for upscale housing. And I don't think that's what we want. That's the kind of place where you want your densest housing. So I think we should push harder also in this plan of conservation and development that should be mixed housing at least. And then last point, storm drainage. So as a small town, Kent is not subject to the MS4 regulations, but wouldn't it be good to suggest that we gradually start adopting some of the measures they propose in there, just voluntarily on a gradual basis, because they are meant to improve both the drainage and the environmental, limit the environmental impacts. So
But I think on that one, Jose, when we rewrote the zoning regulations with the commission, we included a section on stormwater drainage, which incorporated and embraced LID, which really addresses the MS4 requirements as part of the zoning regulation. So that's new development. And as part of the POCD, I spent time talking with the public works people, and HVA has been working closely with the public works people in terms of culvert replacements and drainage improvements in an environmentally sensitive way. So I think that Kent's got a pretty good program in place already that we require private development to address this. And then the public works is sort of on top of this and trying to do the right thing. So let me think about this some more, but we may already have made a lot of progress on this.
So, and we use an outside town engineer, right? And is that engineer instructed to use the LID regulations as our main?
That's the way the regulations are set up. It basically requires a private developer to use and incorporate LID unless the town says no, it won't work. So I'll go back and take a look at the regulations.
Enforce that?
Say that again?
Does the engineer enforce that?
I don't know, Jos. We'll talk about that.
Okay. Well, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jos, for your careful review of the work. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, Jos, it's nice to have somebody. It's nice to have somebody so thoroughly double checking. So it's, thank you. All right, so it's Mr. Sanchez.
I'm back. Just clarification, actually. I'm on page 59, Village Center Principles again, and I see implementation, number 20. So it says, consider the potential of a tax increment financing, allocating tax revenues from new development to fund infrastructure improvements for that development and or the community to encourage and facilitate development, residential and or business in the village center. So I guess I got a few questions. What would that tax rate be, roughly? How would this help? Like where exactly? Like how would this help the village center? Like how we're encouraging and facilitating development, but how, what would that go to exactly? And what's an example of another town that does this actually?
Yep. So that's a great set of questions, Glenn. I think tax increment financing is a concept in Connecticut which has picked up some traction over the last 5 or 10 years or so. And it's caused communities to think about that the increased tax revenue that comes from a development isn't always just a windfall to the municipality, but in fact, the community could evaluate that tax increment from new development and actually reinvest the funds to accomplish community objectives. So I had the opportunity to work with the Planning and Zoning Commission on an incentive housing zone study, and that might have been 8 years ago or 6 years ago, something like that. And we looked at the meadow. We recognized there are some drainage challenges in the meadow. And there's also the desire for a connecting road from the town center out to Maple Street Extension. Because the railroad crossing and the way the grades work, it's not a simple connection, but it's something that could be really important for the community. So if we looked at development of the meadow as providing tax revenue to the community, and we said, we will assist in accomplishing the drainage, reconnecting the water system, creating this roadway, which has community benefits, that might be a way for us to proceed. So communities around the state have done this. It's not a particularly simple matter. It requires a stated plan as to where's the money coming from? What are you going to do with it? Because it becomes a public policy objective. So the plan, the POCD doesn't make any specific recommendation for that, but it suggests that as a concept, if there are things we would want to do, in the town center plan talks about possible connectivity elements, that there might be ways that it could be accomplished without really sort of costing the town money or waiting for grants or things to evolve, that there might be another method. So it's, as you had sort of described in your earlier comments, sometimes a picture or a statement can plant a seed of an idea that may flourish over the next 5 or 10 years. And that was the concept here.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I see no other hands up. Does the balance of the full commission, the Planning and Zoning Commission, have any comments for now? And does anybody else from the public who's joined us tonight have anything else? So Glenn, I saw you raised your hand. David signaled that he wants to jump in. So go ahead, David.
Yeah, just a quick question. We reference decarbonizing and we reference greenhouse gases and that sort of thing. I know I've talked about this before, but since the state has adopted specific goals, is it worth strengthening that language about specifically adopting a track towards carbon neutrality at some point? Is it like a general principle rather than we kind of dance around it a little bit without putting anything specific next to it? I'm just wondering if, given what's been kind of happening at the state level, it might be worth putting more emphasis on that in that section. I think that was also echoed in at least one of the letters we got.
Yeah, and I think this is a good thing for us to talk about. I think as the plan was coming together, the Sustainability Committee was starting their work effort in terms of looking at some of these issues, but we didn't want to step in their territory. But I think with their correspondence, they've encouraged us to do so. So I'm going to be preparing a report for the committee and for the commission that summarizes the comments we've received and suggests possible pathways forward. And I think what you suggested is one of the things we'll talk about.
Okay. And then because of decarbonization or moving to carbon neutrality implies that pretty much everything will move to electrical power, which means that a lot of our utilities, which are currently individually run on propane or fuel oil, will put a different load on our grid. do we have anything backing up the statement that we believe our grid is suitable for the next 10 years? I mean, it's I don't remember what page it was on, but it's basically a 1-sentence line. Have we, oh, here it is, yeah, on page 94, adequate electrical power is expected to be available in the future. I mean, do we actually know that's true, given how the trajectory of things might be changing, and do we need to like reach out to either Eversource or the PSC of Connecticut, like to actually put some meat on that bone, or is that something we need to look in further?
It's interesting. I mean, DPUC contains information on the electrical providers. After 9/11, the information has become harder to get with the meaningful information that we would certainly like to have. So the statements about, everything looks rosy are oftentimes the best that you can do. The plan does contain recommendations related to solar and advancing solar types of techniques. I think over time the electrical utility grid will backfill with higher capacity cables or voltage, whatever else they're going to need to be doing on that. So there has not been detailed research into the electrical grid, and that's an interesting thought. So I'll think about that one and figure out how to address that.
Right. 'Cause some of the, you do mention things like microgrids. Some of the thinking out there is that electric cars, for example, connected to chargers at home, which is where 90+% of charging tends to happen, will be one of the storage elements that make a grid more resilient. I don't think we call out encouraging people to charge at home or support that sort of infrastructure where you've got power storage spread out through the community to help build that grid. I think that's also something that we might want to put in here to specifically try to support that, or at least encourage it through zoning or other techniques, because it's
So zoning doesn't, it's fairly uncommon for the zoning regulations to require on a zoning permit type activity like building a house, that even it be wired for an electric vehicle. You'd like that to happen.
Right. And I think it's just time to start thinking outside that box a little bit and see,
Yeah.
not necessarily with zoning as a tool, but it's a POCD for everything. So part of that everything should say, how do we get homeowners to start thinking about this and making sure their homes are ready with whatever it is, batteries, electric cars, magic beans, whatever we can find that'll make it work.
Thank you, David.
Matt, could I dovetail on David's comment?
Of course, Jean.
Thanks. The governor was in Kent today, which was very exciting. And one of the things that we talked about was energy and the electric grid. And I think he said 50% of the power generation in Connecticut is actually coming through Millstone, coming from nuclear. They're also looking at, he talked about wind power a few times. So I think that is also going to be coming as an alternative to create and to support the electric grid. I think there might be information on the climate change page that I'll send you, Glenn, as well, on the capacity stuff. Another piece as far as electric vehicle charging that I think is definitely worth note, when David was talking, it reminded me that the Federal Highway Administration recently designated Route 7 from the New Milford-Kent border to the Massachusetts border as an alternative fuel corridor. And so that is going to bring a lot of funding and push for electric vehicle chargers in that corridor. So from a long-term standpoint, we're going to see funding coming down to support homeowners, to support businesses, to support municipalities converting and putting in more electric vehicle chargers, and those level 2, level 3, the the next gen sort of chargers. And it also creates a buffer zone off of the actual roadway. So it's not that it's just Route 7 and the parking lots next to it. There's a buffer zone that goes off. So we could be looking at a really, really amazing opportunity long-term to get a lot more opportunities for homeowners, for businesses to have electric vehicle chargers in town all along that corridor and the buffer zone that goes off the corridor. And I can also send you that link, Glenn.
Perfect.
Thanks, Jean. So Justin Potter has his hand up.
Sorry, one last question. So at the beginning of the at the beginning of the presentation, you mentioned something about how the plan is only as good as far as it's turned into action, or something along those lines. And so the key to turning the aspirations of the POCD and also the housing plan into action is translating them into regulations. So what is the procedure for initiating the comprehensive sort of review and update of the zoning regulations, like what occurred in 2013 and again in 2018?
I think the plan strategies, part of the challenge of a POCD is that people often peak on the adoption of the plan and think, well, we adopted the plan, our job is done. And realistically, it's the implementation of the plan that accomplishes the things that you or people in Kent feel is important. So we tried to configure this plan with a focus on implementation. And one of the things we've suggested for consideration is a plan implementation committee, which could be made up of representatives from different boards in town, providing input on these sorts of issues, and whether it's funding through the budgetary process or regulation changes from different commissions, including wetlands or planning and zoning or other commissions in town for reg changes, to focus efforts in those areas where we can accomplish the most. So the plan supports that, it encourages that, but it's up to all of us to kind of work together to make sure that those things happen. And therein lies the challenge of a plan. It's not a dictate. You can't force anybody to do anything. So we've got to kind of all pull together to try to encourage that to happen.
So maybe one quick question relative to that. I know this is our third or fourth plan. And I love that it looks forward and lays out a lot of really important things we should be looking at. At any point, do we add a little piece that says, here's how we did with the last plan? Or are we just afraid to look, kind of measure how we did as a community on adopting on our implementation of the 2012 POCD?
It's actually can be hard to do for a couple of different reasons. There's two types of recommendations that generally occur in things like plans of conservation and development. The first of which we've called in this plan policies. A policy is something, go west, young man, go west. Well, it doesn't really give you any detail. So if you're going west, do you measure progress or not? If your plan says go west and get to Omaha by Tuesday afternoon, that's okay. Did we make it or not? So those are called action steps. So you can measure action steps because you can complete them, but policies tend to be ongoing things that don't readily lend themselves to measurement. So even the concept of implementation is hard to measure in that way, because you got to split it up between a policy, which you can't measure. So implementation, maybe we advanced it, but we didn't complete it. And this is the hard part. So there's no simple metric like 57% implement. Doesn't really kind of work that way. And again, that's one of the challenges, I think, in government plans of this type.
The plan says go west, and I look around and I'm in Nova Scotia right now, then I know I did not follow my plan very well. Part of the reason I bring this up is we're rewriting the housing plan, and Virginia gave us the it was like, do you remember, Justin, it was like 1969 or something like that? And we probably could have just adopted it. I don't think, to be honest, it shows that we haven't made a lot of great progress.
Yep.
So anyway, just a thought there. I thought a little retrospective might help put things in perspective of how challenging this is for us to complete.
It is, and I think everybody that I've been working with, it's our heartfelt desire to move towards implementation. And so hopefully with yours and others' assistance, we'll get closer, we'll get there. Thank you.
So Glenn, I will, oh, Karen, was that a hand up? Oh, but Ann, that's a hand up. Oh, that's not a hand up either. All right, so you're both like, no. Then Glenn, I'm gonna give it back to you for a wrap up of the your last slide, your presentation. That's
Thank you, Matt.
sure.
So thank you, everybody, for your input here tonight. I've got 6 pages of notes, so I'm going to organize these for the commission to help us move forward. The next steps that we envision as part of this process is that I'm going to organize the comments. We're going to get together with the POCD subcommittee and the Planning and Zoning Commission, decide what changes to make in the POCD, where and how, and make those revisions, and then eventually move towards a public hearing on adoption. So realistically, I think it's at least 3 to 4 months before we get close to adoption. And there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, we got to get the comments compiled and we got to talk them over. But the statutes also require a 65-day period for the proposed plan to be referred to the Board of Selectmen and the Council of Governments. So even if we were to decide to go today, it really wouldn't be until mid-August before we could do that, and clearly we're not ready to go today. So thank you, everybody, for your input, and we hope to address your comments and be ready with something in the fall to consider for adoption. So with that, thank you very much.
Nice note. Thank you, Glenn.
Thanks, Glenn. Wes, I'll just say one other thing and then turn it back over to you. So we have this small window still where we would like to accept some additional public comment. So over the next 3 or 4 or 5 days, I think we had said by maybe mid next week. And I know that everybody's got this great opportunity with the holiday weekend coming up that they can, spend some time sitting in front of the draft POCD and come up with some additional comments. But whatever comments you want to get to us and tell all your friends and neighbors, maybe mid to late next week. And then Glenn will spend a couple of weeks getting those comments together for us to review. So we won't close the door, but the more comments we get early on in this process, the better off we'll all be. So thank you. Thanks for coming. And Wes, back to you.
Matt, thank you very much. Well, this was a great informative meeting. Glenn, again, thank you so much. I think we've taken a big step forward here, and we'll look forward to meeting with you in the subcommittee.
Thank you.
So this was the only item on the agenda. So I would call for an adjournment.
So I would move to adjourn.
I will second that motion.
Okay. I assume we're all in favor. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks, Donna.
You're welcome. Bye.